So, Liddy, not only are you a recent and acceptable and agreeable participant, but you're going to be the first. Well, tell us about your work, and particularly perhaps some of the local initiatives that you see happening to address these very, very complex issues about climate change and climate justice.
Well, probably to start, I have to correct that I was until recently international coordinator, but now I'm coordinating, focusing on Asia now, still with the same organization. And what I'd like to talk about is how many of our members, movements, who are movements of ordinary folks like vendors and hawkers from India and the Philippines, fisher folk, women, are trying to deal with climate change, not just in their local context, but also at the national and at the global level. And I think it's very inspiring that our movements are looking at themselves and as not just victims of climate change, dealing with the impacts, but also trying to exercise their political power in shaping the solutions for climate change. So what I'd like to talk about right now, very briefly, is how we're trying to engage with the international level, the policies and the issues that are being discussed at the international level, and how our movements have come to know more and understand what is happening at the international negotiations. And one of the recent initiatives we have is to launch campaigns in different countries that in the Philippines we call Cut and Be Just campaign. And it is a campaign that is aimed at the rich developing countries in the UNFCCC language, the Annex 1 countries, so that we can add our voices and our political force to compel these countries to cut their emissions and be part of the just solutions to climate change. One of the actions we did recently was when Connie Hedegaard, which is the EU Commissioner for Climate Justice, visited the Philippines last month. And so we had a meeting with her, so it was kind of like a good debate about the issues, as well as a mobilization outside to express our message. And the main message we had to Ms. Hedegaard was to say that the 20% target of the EU for 2020 is absolutely unacceptable. It is too low, too unambitious, and it is nowhere near what the EU countries collectively must do in order to, account for their historical responsibility for climate change. Of course, it's not the only thing we're interested in. We're also pushing our own governments to do something about climate change and to contribute to the global efforts. So currently, what we're doing is a global campaign against dirty energy and seeking for our governments to transform their energy policies and shift as quickly as possible to renewable energy and clean energy. One of the greatest injustice of this situation, of course, is the fact that even though our countries have very little share in the historical causes for climate change and in the continuing high emissions that are causing climate change, science is telling us that what you can do, what is physically still possible to do in the north, is not enough to prevent runaway climate change, so that we need to do something also in the south. And not because we're responsible, but because that is the reality that has led your actions, the actions of rich countries, has led to us, for all of us in the planet today, that we all have to have a share in the burden. So we are also pushing our governments to act as quickly as possible to have that share of the burden. So this is just a message to say that ordinary folks all around the world, they are very concerned about what's happening in the international level, in the climate negotiations, and that they do have a stand and something to say about what's happening. We're not just victims, but we are going to exercise our power to force the world to do what must be done in order to save us from certain extinction if we don't do something.
Given what you've said about the EU targets and about the fact that you accept that nations in the south, the less developed nations, also have to assume responsibility, what do you think that we in this room in Edinburgh in October need to hear from you that hasn't been said?
I don't know that I have something to say that hasn't been said, but I think we need to keep saying it over and over again.
Yeah.
I think it's good that Scotland has this high ambition, comparatively higher ambition than other countries in the EU, or I wouldn't say other countries because Scotland is not a country yet, is it? So it's really commendable. If you are able to even raise your ambition higher, that would be even more wonderful. But I think a very urgent task is how to convince the rest of the EU to have a higher ambition. I think the EU looks at itself as the good guy, so maybe it is comparative to the US, but I think anyone will look better than the US in this situation. So I think it shouldn't settle for the 20% ambition. And we must say that we're also quite aware that the 20% is already within reach. You're about to reach it. EU is about to reach it. So it's like saying our target is not to do anything much until the year 2020 because it's already nearly there.
Okay, thank you for that. Might come back and ask you about some of the local projects that you've seen, but let's move on and introduce others. Now, Anders, I'm going to turn to you, if I may, and ask you to tell us, in the light of what we've heard from Liddy, as a European, about the initiatives that your business, ABB, has been taking, what that has meant for your business, and what some of the issues are that arise. And you might want to just tell us a little bit more about ABB at the outset, so we understand the context in which your work has taken place.
Yes. Well, thank you. ABB is a multinational operating in over 100 countries. We supply electric power technology solutions and industry automation solution. We are 145,000 people, turnover of $39 billion US. We have 3,000 employees in the UK, closest office in Aberdeen, actually. We recognize climate change as important to us in the energy business already in 1988 and had an expert on it informing the group management on climate change. Now we have many experts on the subject, and it's actually a part of the business we make. And I think in this context, our business in delivering energy efficiency to our customers and in integrating renewable energy into the power grid, into the transportation system, I mean, it's part of helping the big emitters to transform into a low carbon economy. And we are also part of helping emerging economies not to take the same path as the already developed economies has taken before them. So, and that is a role where we feel very comfortable, and it's strongly recognized that we have business here for a very, very long time, and we are comfortable with that. Then looking at another area where I think we have a good story to tell that also comes closer to the topic of this conference is on business and human rights. Yeah. Because ABB has for some 8-10 years been engaged in the topic on business and human rights. We learned a lot through the Business Leaders Initiative on human rights that had the pleasure of having Mary Robinson as honorary chair, where we learned and shared experience with other big companies. And we see the business case for ABB in being engaged on human rights, like as a multinational operating in over 100 countries, sensitive countries, sometimes engaged in sensitive projects, sourcing issues, etc., etc. So human rights is clearly something we need to do. And now implementing the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights. And I think we have made some progress integrating it into our processes, etc. But still, we have a lot to do. It's work in progress. And, well, it's challenging, to be honest.
Yep.
Yeah. No.
Can I come back? Can I come back on a couple of points? But the first would be on the business case so far as human rights are concerned. Accepting for the moment that ABB has taken an initiative in this field and understands what needs to be done and can be done, but perhaps also accepting that many other businesses have not embraced this agenda. What would be your message to other businesses about the business benefits of embracing a human rights culture? I mean, what one or two specific messages would you say to those who are resistant in business to adopting a human rights approach that would perhaps influence or even compel them to change?
Yeah. I think for a global brand, you don't have a choice. You need to do it. If you operate globally, you need to not only make your customers happy, but you need to make your stakeholders happy. And that's local stakeholders where you deliver your projects, but also the stakeholders at home. You cannot separate that. And it's also, I mean, business ethics is very strong and on the rise. And we have a very strong commitment to integrity in ABB, and the different agendas, integrity, anti-corruption, environment, social, and human rights, they reinforce each other. So I think it's not as much convincing others, but accepting that you need to go in this direction, then people will go at different pace, but it's the only direction.
Can you identify one event, step, or occasion which was the catalyst in ABB for this approach?
Yes, yes. I mean, there are several cases, but often you need something bad to make people understand that you need change. And I don't want to mention bad things, but we were heavily criticized for doing business in the Sudan, for instance, some 8-10 years ago. And we sorted out that, did quite a lot of effort, and that was an eye-opener, I think, to many in the business, in our business, that we need to understand these issues better. And that resulted, for instance, in a sensitive countries protocol that we now use everywhere in the business.
Was that called the sensitive countries?
Sensitive countries, a special protocol on how to act in sensitive countries.
Okay, thank you, Anders. And very interesting. I'd like to reflect perhaps on what in the EU needs to be done to address the 20% is not enough that we've heard from Lydia, but come back perhaps. Commodius, Clinton Foundation and Malawi and the initiatives in Malawi. Can you tell us, first of all, a little bit about your work with the Clinton Foundation and what that engages you in? And then, if you wish, tell us something about the local projects in Malawi.
Okay, thank you very much. I will speak briefly on the initiative under the Clinton Foundation, which I'm attached to. The Clinton Foundation in Malawi, as some of you might be aware, has several arms in terms of developmental projects. One of them happens to be a project on climate change, which I got engaged in at the very beginning, which we called Trees of Hope. Maybe the name actually came into being because at the time I was developing the proposal for this particular project, we knew that climate change was just coming on the scene in the country. And we knew that there were still a lot of issues to be looked into. And we thought we were planting a seed of hope in the project. So what I will share with you today in brief would be that work on Trees of Hope as a climate change-based project in Malawi. Malawi, as we are all aware, being one of the least developed countries in the world where vulnerability to climate change is very high, I think I should not spend time trying to explain to what extent Malawians, especially the local people out there, the poorest of the poor, are facing in the face of climate change. Climate change in Malawi has simply affected the very code of survival. Climate change is affecting several sectors, but I will just bring your attention to the very pertinent one, the food security aspect. Malawi has a population of about 14 million as of now. 85% of this population is dependent on subsistence land-fed agriculture. This simply stands in the firing line of climate change. As we are speaking now, droughts are common. Seasons are no longer predictable. Farmers, as is the case in most parts of the developing world, are simply at a loss as to what livelihood they will grab for their survival. So what we're expecting here in terms of climate change, elsewhere the effects might be less felt, but in Malawi, effects of climate change are issues of survival. So with that background, when Clinton Foundation came to Malawi with several other initiatives, we thought it wise to include a project on climate change in the country. Basically, this project started in 2008 when we developed the first proposal to have the project in place. And we thought by going ahead, we were aware of the other carbon finance aspects in the world. And we thought, much as our key objective of the project was to look at, let's try to establish land use systems in Malawi that would be resilient enough to climate change and still offer a livelihood to the community. That is our key objective. We should have land use systems that are compatible with the existing land use systems that would offer some resilience to climate change. At the same time, much as we recognize that we are not, we are the least responsible for carbon emissions, we thought of trying to bring in an element of mitigation, because we cannot just sit back saying we are not responsible and we can't do anything. We need to be responsible. So we also attached an element of carbon mitigation into the project. That brought us to a step further to start thinking of carbon finance aspect. And then we chose to work under one of the carbon standards around, the Plan Vivo carbon standard. So this project is also being overseen by the Plan Vivo carbon standard. And we got certified in 2011, 3 years down the line after we had started our work. So over the years, as we went out to link up with the communities, it dawned upon us that success of such projects require proper involvement of the people that we are targeting. So we thought of seeking consent from the rural farmers that we are targeting on the ground. So at the beginning of the program, we carried out massive campaigns to sensitize the communities as to what they're about to get into. So we covered several issues, including climate change aspects, tree management, carbon trading aspects. All we were trying to get at was to get informed consent of the participants, because here we're talking about change in land use systems, which will be there for a longer time. So we cannot afford to take on board people who don't actually know what they're getting into. So consent into such projects is very, very key in moving them forward. So we sought that one out. And then we had to design the project together with the communities, because such projects normally start on the road to failure if the people who bear the brunt of climate change are not taken on board at the designing stage. So this project actually took into account that particular aspect by trying to engage them in trying to design the project itself. So what we're saying about here is we are talking about trying to identify tree species which are indigenous to Malawi and the locations where we are working in. And these tree species were actually chosen by the farmers themselves, who we are now working with as our partners. The whole understanding was these farmers should get into the project by coming up with land use systems which they know will benefit them. Okay. So it was like a bottom-up approach in trying to design the program. So that's what we managed to do over the years, 2008 up to now. Over the years, we've done quite a lot in terms of trying to achieve what we have done so far over the 3 years now that we 5 years since 2008. We are still ongoing. All we're saying now is, as we speak now, we have managed to come up with a wider choice that the farmers came up with in terms of land use systems, which had inbuilt livelihood benefits. For example, we had to increase the options from which farmers can choose the land use systems. So now in our project, we have got 5 land use systems from which farmers can choose from. One of them is a woodlot. Farmers can get into planting of trees as a woodlot. Some of them can get into agroforestry land use systems, because as we are speaking, the land holding size in Malawi is on average about 0.4. So we are trying to come up with land use systems which will not bring food insecurity at the household. So we are trying to target land use systems which would be compatible with existing arable cropping in Malawi. So we have DSI, which is an agroforestry land system, which simply combines arable crops and trees for soil fertility improvement. So in the eyes of the farmer, he is getting into this land use system not for the other issues of to do with maybe mitigation, but he's getting into it because that will improve soil fertility, that will improve water holding capacity of the soil in the event of climate change. We also have what we call boundary planting, whereby farmers actually plant trees around farms. These trees are also specifically chosen to make sure that these also benefit the soils and the companion crop that is growing nearby. So we also have fruit-based land systems. We've got mango fruits, mango orchards, and citrus orchards. These are there simply to galvanize extra roots for economic benefit for the farmers. That over and above carbon sequestration that these trees can actually manage to sequester or sink, farmers should see the need to maintain the tree species just because of the inherent livelihood benefits that these people are actually seeing in those land use systems. So as we're speaking now, we have meant to establish over 1,500 hectares of carbon sinks that are existing under the project, and with a capacity over the years to sequester over 200,000 tons of CO2. So much as we are not responsible, so to say, for causing climate change, but here we are taking very small steps that we can manage to take to make sure that we make a difference in terms of carbon sequestration also. Okay. And we
can I come in, if I may? Forgive me for doing so, but pick up on some of these themes, Commodious. I mean, what you're saying is that you are, in a sense, at the coalface of all of this, carrying out initiatives in your own country, which, as you use the word, sensitize, which educates and involve the people who are most affected by climate change. We in this room, many of us, talk about all these things theoretically, but don't actually experience them in the way that you and your country people experience them. What do you expect from government in your own country and elsewhere, and what do you expect from business in your own country and elsewhere in supporting these initiatives?
Yeah, my response to that would be, on the part of the government, I think the starting point would be to have in place policy and legislation that is people-centered. I think this is where the challenge would be also. Governance comes to the fore here in trying to address issues of climate justice. It pains when we look at some of these developing countries, including mine, when governance leaves a lot to be desired. So climate justice, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of at government level, the issues, policy and legislation should be the correct one, people-centered, and has to be implemented in a people-centered approach. Because having policies in place is one thing, but seeing them through on the ground is another.
And from business?
And from business, it comes back to some government. It has to create enabling environment for businesses to participate in coming up with climate justice initiatives. Yeah, I think on business, okay, that's what I would say.
The whole idea of people-centeredness and an enabling environment takes us comfortably, doesn't it, into the discussion of climate justice rather than just climate change. And I'm going to ask now Pat, thank you very much, Commodious, to pick this up. I mean, you've got a vast experience as a diplomat from a European base, as it were, but seeing some of the developments over the last many years. Can you pick up on some of these themes and identify what you think are the things that work well from your experience and also the impediments that need to be overcome?
Thanks very much, Sean. I'd like to start by congratulating the Scottish Government taking this initiative and organising a very good conference with a very good mix, I think, of participants from policymakers, business, NGOs, and all aspects of society. And I should also say that I'm sort of representing our Minister for Development, who was invited today but couldn't come. We've been, I think, very focused on the whole idea of global justice and global citizenship and global development in Ireland throughout the existence of the Irish state. That comes from our sort of historical experience, and experience of famine, and experience of colonisation and so forth, and colonialism, which inspires our values. In our constitution, the word justice is writ large there, and it has been the thing which has inspired us, successive governments, with cross-party support in politics, with wide support across society, to pursue, I think, very strong policies and initiatives around human rights, And Mary Robinson, before her current role, of course, was High Commissioner for Human Rights of the United Nations and very strong ambassador in that role. Around disarmament, Ireland was the country that proposed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and has pursued many other disarmament initiatives. And I think has been a leader in development cooperation and sort of development justice too. We certainly see climate change and the impacts of climate change right at the heart of that debate and that discussion, that dialogue about global justice. Somewhat similar to the sort of the Scottish experience and the Scottish role in this, and as Alex Salmon said earlier, with our best intentions and with the amount of money that we can provide, we are still small players. So very much a strong principle of what we aim to do is to set an example and to lead by example. I think there's description here about having good stories to tell and being trailblazers in terms of this session. That's certainly what we've tried to do is to some extent blaze a trail and hope others will follow. We base our approaches on now decades of experience of involvement in development cooperation. We've had a long societal history through missionaries and lay NGOs and so forth of going out there and providing help and partnership in the developing world. That's been on a very firm footing since Ireland joined the European Union in 1973. 40 years of having a very strong, I think, official development program has given us a great expertise and a great experience in Asia, in sub-Saharan Africa and elsewhere to base our principles on. And as I said, we now see climate change and climate justice at the very heart of that. And it's a multifaceted issue, but there are certainly two very big parts to it. Number one is the behavior of businesses, of individual citizens and of societies and countries as a whole in the developing world.